Hello and welcome to the 2018-2019 Intramural Sports Captains webinar for Kennesaw State University. During this webinar, we're going to talk about our staff introductions, and we're going to go through some responsibilities you have as a captain, as well as some program updates and reminders that we have navigating and accessing our website IM Leagues, and that was where our divisions and schedules will be posted. Our game facilities and where you can park at our game facilities. Roster management guidelines and participant guidelines, some special game situations that you can be prepared for as a captain, sportsmanship procedures and ejection procedures, and guidelines for our playoffs. I'm DJ Doss. I'm the Senior Coordinator of Intramural Sports here at Kennesaw State, and Mia Greiner is our incoming graduate assistant. Together we make up our program administrative staff, and so together we'll be working in the office to get schedules sent out to you and have everything ready for your games. Besides myself, everybody else is a student staff member. So we have two program assistants who are going to be helping us out in the office, and those two program assistants are part of our 10 site supervisors. Those site supervisors will be wearing those black and gold polos you can see on the screen. They're going to be your main point of contact. They'll be wearing name tags out there to be visible. And so if you have any questions, concerns, they should be able to help you out on any given night. We also have a staff of about 35 game officials and scorekeepers who will be out there refereeing your games and helping keep track of the score. Some of the responsibilities that you have as a captain are listed on this screen. But some of the key ones to focus on is taking care of that communication from our IM staff. So we're going to be sending out emails, maybe some texts, maybe making some phone calls. So be ready to read all of those and reciprocate communication to our staff. You're going to also want to keep track of your team roster and the eligibility that's listed on IM Leagues to make sure that everybody that's on your roster is good to go before we get to those games. And then you're going to essentially be our liaison between the team and the program. So be ready to assist our staff with any issues that we have going on, whether that's with the team or with some spectators at the events. And feel free to address any of those questions with IM staff members, either by reaching out to us or by talking to those supervisors on site. Some changes and reminders from the program. So last year we did change the team creation process, and we felt like that was met with a lot of success. It helped us lower our default and forfeit numbers. So we are continuing with this process. When you create a team, your team is automatically placed on the wait list, and then once that team meets the required number of players, that team is then moved into the division that is auto-selected based on your preferences listed when you create the team. So as soon as you hit that minimum player, the team is automatically moved over. For roster locks, we did change this and completely remove the roster lock. You can add players all the way through playoffs now, but if a player has not played by the time we get to the championship game, has not checked in, that player is not going to be eligible to play in the championship game. For our forfeits and our team fees, the forfeit fees are now assessed throughout the season, and they will be entirely online. And those team fees are still going to be charged for bowling and golf since we use off-campus venues. And then our ringer limit, again, we changed that last year, and so we'll talk about that a little bit deeper into the webinar. For the program reminders, grace period, again, if you don't have anybody that's actually on site at game time for your team, that will turn into an automatic forfeit. For the forfeit deposits, again, we've done away with those, and so everything is entirely on banner. When we charge that forfeit fee, it goes to the captain's student account, and then the captain is responsible for handling getting money from other team members if they so choose. For the roster caps, again, all of our sports still have those roster caps in place. So it's usually twice the number of players you can have on the field or on the court. So for flag football, you can have 7 on the field. Our maximum number of players on the roster is 14. For the team schedules and playoffs, we changed this a couple of years ago as well and felt like this has been met with some pretty good success as well. And so instead of having bye weeks during the regular season, all teams are eligible to make playoffs and play 3 games against your division. And then once that regular season is done, everybody gets scheduled for their 4th game. So to access the IM Sports website, the first place you're going to go is to mysportsrec.kennesaw.edu. This should be where you're going to create your team and where you're going to get your players to sign up to join your team. So when you go to mysportsrec.kennesaw.edu, you're going to come to this home screen, and so you can either click the login button at the top right, or you can click the Intramural Sports button. Once you've logged in, that Intramural Sports button is going to be where you're going to go to access IM Leagues. But when you go to the login page, it's going to look like this. And so you're going to click that gold bar that says KSU Net ID and Password so that you're using your student or faculty staff Net ID and password. Once you sign in, again, you'll go to that IM Sports button, and that'll give you an orange banner to IM Leagues, which will bring you to our IM Leagues homepage, and that looks like this. So on your IM Leagues homepage, the first part that you're going to want to know about is the handbooks and the manuals. So the arrows pointing to where you can see all of the intramural sports participants handbooks and all of our rules for all of our sports. This is also going to be where you can go to access our default form and our spectator request form. We're also hoping to have those on our intramural sports website, which is given at the end of the presentation. You can also access this at the bottom of the intramural sports page, so that's going to look like this. And so our contact information, the rules in the handbook, those links are down there. And if you're having issues with actually utilizing IM Leagues, there's also live support. And so they're pretty good in terms of being responsive. And if you reach out to them, they can usually chat with you pretty quickly. That question mark button that's got the arrow pointing to it, that's also always available. And so that'll prompt you towards the links for the rules, handbook, contact information, and FAQs for the program. When you're looking at your division or your league, you'll be able to see that F/D column, and that's going to be the forfeits and defaults that your team has listed for the season. If there's a 1 in that F column, that's going to mean that your team could be charged a forfeit fee at the end of the year. And if there's more than a 1 in that default column, same thing, your team could get charged for a forfeit. So if you see that and you feel like it's an error, or if you have any questions, you can always reach out to our staff to touch base on that. But keep an eye on that and monitor that to make sure that it's accurate throughout the season. On your team page, this is what your view is going to look like as a captain. And so you can click that team options button, and that'll give you a bunch of different options for your team, including changing the team name, changing the color. You'll be able to send out announcements to your team. So a lot of different tools that you have at your disposal there. It also kind of helps you monitor your roster. The other arrow is pointing to the pending requests that are showing for this team. So if you click on the view, you can see the 2 people that are requesting to join your team, and then you can either choose to accept or decline to get them added. But if you have limits on people being able to join your team, that pending request is going to pop up if it's not automatically adding players to your team if you don't choose that setting. In terms of our facility locations and parking, this is a list of where we're playing most of our games on campus. The Owl's Nest and the Perch are part of the Sports and Recreation Park. That's over next to Fifth Third Bank Stadium, the football stadium, as well as the track. So just a little bit off campus, but the addresses are listed there. The Betty Siegel SRAC is where we're going to play most of our indoor sports on the Kennesaw campus, and then the Marietta RWC is where we're going to play indoor sports at Marietta. And then the Marietta recreational fields are over next to the fraternity houses on the Marietta campus. And so that's a list of the addresses for you there, but you can also find those on the IM Leagues site. If you go to the facilities link, it's got the address and it even shows it on a map. For parking at the game sites, for all of our sites that are not at the park, so the SRAC, RWC, and the Marietta fields, you're going to park in the lot that's based on your parking pass. So make sure you're checking out the parking website there and making sure that you're parking in the right lots. For the Owl's Nest and the Perch, there's a few different community parking places that you can access. There's some parking right next to the Perch, some parking right next to the Nest, but all of that's shaded in red there, and this map is also on IM Leagues. But make sure you're only parking in those red spots. If you're not parking in the right spot based on this map or parking's maps, you could get a ticket or you could be booted or even towed. So just keep an eye on that and make sure we're parking in the right places. For divisions and game schedules, the teams are going to be created, and then you're automatically going to go to the wait list like we talked about earlier, and then you come off that wait list once the minimum required player total is met. If you select division preferences when you create the team, it's going to automatically move you to the top preference that you have that's got an open spot. So I suggest highly that you make sure that you're setting up those division preferences when you create the team. For those divisions, they're listed by the location first, and then the day and time of the regular season play. So MC2's 6:30 p.m. means that games are going to be played at the Marietta campus on Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m. for the regular season. There are some exceptions due to facility schedule or holidays. So we have Labor Day coming up for September, and then MLK Day in the spring. And for both of those, that's going to affect those Monday leagues, and we're going to move those games to Fridays. So just keep an eye on your schedule, keep an eye on the announcements, and make sure you're prepared for those. All of our regular season schedules should be posted by about 5 o'clock on the Friday that registration closes. For your rosters, the roster cap is listed per each sport in IM League, so you're not going to be able to add more folks, but it's also in that rules document. So keep an eye on that. Make sure you're not trying to add too many players onto your team or over-promising in that aspect. Once a player is checked in for a game, the player is part of that team's roster. They can't be dropped or they can't switch teams once they've checked in for a game, even if they didn't play. The only exception that we have is that we are now allowing players that if there's a serious injury, especially if we're getting close to playoff time and we have a document, the admin staff will review it, and we will allow one player to be dropped from a team roster. So we're not allowing anybody to change teams, but if a team needs a spot to be freed up because somebody's injured and we have some confirmation on that, we will work with the team to potentially get that player removed from the roster. There's also no longer that roster lock date, so you'll be able to add players all the way up to your roster cap throughout the entire season. The only caveat there is that the players have to be checked in for at least one game to be able to play in the championship game. For on-site check-in, all players have to have a valid form of ID on them. It's got to be the physical ID, can't be a picture, but it can be a KSU ID or other government-issued form of ID. So we'll include Georgia Highland College and driver's license and passports, but not things like credit cards with pictures or other school IDs. Players have to be on that printed roster that's out there at the site, and they have to have taken the quiz. We'll help you by looking up players on site when we're able, but you want to try to minimize this so that we stay on time. If we're running late because of having to add players to rosters, it may impact the amount of time that you're able to play, and we may have to cut some of that game time. You also want to have the minimum number of players required checked in by game time. If that does not happen by game time, then the grace period starts. Get your team to arrive about 10-15 minutes early, start warming up, be ready to play, and we'll be able to avoid that grace period and cutting back on game time. All teams are allowed one coach on the team bench. The coach does not have to check in, but they do not have any abilities during the game, so they're not going to be able to call timeouts or anything of that nature. They shouldn't be working with our referees. It should truly just be out there to coach the team. For our free agents, they're going to be registered on the IM League site. They create a profile and list the times that they're available. So if you're looking for bench players or extra players, it's definitely a good idea to look up that free agent group and tap into them. Look under men's and women's and co-rec, because some people create one in men's or women's and then they may be able to play co-rec. So you can definitely look in both, but one profile is created per league. So definitely look across all of the sport to see if you have anybody that you can pick up on your team if needed. For eligibility, it's pretty straightforward. Our students have to be a degree-seeking student in at least 1 credit hour and have paid that student recreation fee. As long as they're doing that, they're able to play. If they haven't paid the fee, they can opt into a student membership. But if the student is not taking classes, then they become ineligible. For faculty and staff members, they are also eligible to play, but they have to have a Kennesaw or a combo faculty-staff membership to be able to play intramural sports. Some folks that are typically ineligible and are going to be listed as suspended or as ineligible in the system are going to be people that have been ejected and have not met with our program staff, long-term visitors, alumni, students not in classes or that have withdrawn from their classes, anybody that's in continuing education or professional education. Those are not considered degree seeking. Same for intensive English program students. If you're accepted, but if you're not yet taking classes, and then spouses and other family members, those would typically be ineligible. For our ringers, like we mentioned earlier, this did change a little bit. What is the same is that varsity athletes cannot play their same or related sport on campus. So if they're currently on a roster for this academic year, then they're considered a ringer. Same for professional athletes. Any player that has signed a contract or has been paid to play for a professional or a semi-pro team in the past 5 calendar years, they are considered to be a ringer and cannot play in their related sport. For eligible ringers, former varsity athletes who are no longer on a roster but have been listed on a roster in the past 3 academic years, they will be considered a ringer. And club sports members who are listed on Campus Labs or OwlLife or any other application that relates to club sports at the time of the game, if they're listed on that roster, that makes them a ringer. So again, this is just for related sports, so football to football, rugby to football, but if somebody's playing varsity football, they would be eligible to play basketball or another sport that's not related. So how many ringers can you have on the team? And this is where our change really came into place. Instead of having a specific number across all sports and all teams, it's now related to the roster itself. So it's going to be equal to or less than 50% of the total players on the playing surface at one time. That's the total number that you can have on the roster. So for softball, you can have 10 players on the field at once, which means your maximum roster cap is 20. Your maximum ringer total will be 5. So you can have half of that total on the field as 10. You can have that ringer total be 5. And that's how many people you can have on the roster as a ringer. For fraternity and sorority teams, again, pretty straightforward. You have to meet the eligibility requirements from before, but then you also have to be on the roster for that organization and be in good standing with fraternity and sorority life. As long as you're in good standing with FSL, you're good to go. If the organization is not in good standing, that organization cannot play using names, letters, or anything that signifies to that organization, and the letters cannot be worn during play as well. Some participant guidelines. We allow participants to play in a maximum of 1 single gender and 1 co-rec team per participant. Again, that first team rule, you sign in with 1 team, that's your team through the rest of that sport. There are very few extenuating circumstances that we review case by case, but for the most part, participants are not allowed to change teams. If you use an ineligible participant, based on our eligibility that we just talked about, including ringers, the forfeit fee would apply because it would warrant a forfeit for that game. So you want to make sure that we're keeping up with that participation eligibility so that we don't have forfeits placed on the team and then fees that follow. If you have any concerns or questions, though, you can always contact us. We'll reach out to you and talk to you about what we can do for the participation and eligibility to make sure that we're avoiding these forfeit situations. So for defaults and forfeits, defaults are going to help you out because your sportsmanship rate is going to be higher than receiving a forfeit at the field. The team remains in the league, and there's no forfeit fee that's charged if it's your first default of the season. So again, you're always eligible to fill out that default form and tell us in advance of the game that your team's not going to be able to make it. So you can complete it as far out ahead of time as you need to, but it has to be done by 12 p.m. the day of the game to be listed as completed and accepted. So we'll send you an email, let you know that we've accepted your default. You get 1 of these per season. The second default, it does become a forfeit. So some of the situations that we have for forfeits, if you don't have enough players, if you get ejected as a team due to sportsmanship, you have ineligible players that are listed, 2 defaults or more, the team drops after we've scheduled the games. Playoff games are now included. We're including playoff games in this as well. So you choose your spot on the bracket, and so that means that you need to know what you're playing for the rest of the season. So playoff games will be included. And if there's any reason that your team just is not able to finish outside of injuries or something of that nature, that's also eligible to be a forfeit. Like we hit on earlier, Those forfeit fees are now charged to the captain's banner account. For our league sports, it's a $40 forfeit fee. For our team sports, it's a $20 fee. And for our individual and dual sports, it's a $10 fee. This is not charged per forfeit. It's just charged if a team ever forfeits. So if the team does forfeit twice, it's still only one fee that comes for that team, not multiple. We hit on our grace period a little bit earlier, but this kind of gives some leeway. We understand that some things come up. We know that traffic is absolutely crazy here in Atlanta, so you have the 1 to 5 minutes late grouping and the 6 to 10 minutes late grouping. And so you have a total of 10 minutes to still be able to get to that minimum number of players required to start your game and still be able to play the game without receiving a forfeit. But there are penalties associated with being late, and so you can check out our grace period table and more information on that in that participant handbook. So some special situations, if you win or lose by default or forfeit, those scores are listed in the handbook, and there are some different things that happen with sportsmanship. So our winning teams in defaults or forfeits will always get a perfect sportsmanship rating of 4. And then our default teams will get a 3.33, which keeps you eligible for making playoffs with no issue. And our forfeiting teams will get a 2.33, which puts you below the playoff average. So it's going to hurt your chances of making playoffs if you do forfeit. For weather, we'll make announcements in IM leagues as best we can and reach out to the teams as far in advance as possible. We try to kind of reserve those because weather in Atlanta also can tend to be a little bit crazy. So we try to hold off on those until later in the day or even on game site because we can play through that rain at most of our sites, and lightning tends to be what really helps us, which really forces us to cancel games. For our games in progress, if we have to cancel due to weather or another extenuating circumstances, it depends on the point in the game. We may reschedule, or we may be able to call it a completed game if we're somewhere at or after halftime. Sportsmanship is probably the most crucial part of our program. We emphasize safety first, and sportsmanship is definitely a close second. We want everybody to have a very good time and enjoy playing, and so it's very crucial for us. We emphasize this by having this sportsmanship scale in place, and so our staff after the game will dictate based off of your team's performance during the game what sportsmanship rating is appropriate. We kind of made it a little bit more simplified about 2 years ago, and so if your team does not receive any sportsmanship infractions, your team's going to get some form of an A. And if they receive one sportsmanship infraction, so one technical foul or one unsportsmanlike conduct, those will put you in the B column, 2 puts you at C, and then if you get 3 or more, you're going to be down in that D to F range. Fs are only given for teams that forfeit because of sportsmanship infractions. So sportsmanship relates to your behavior before your game, during your game, and after your game. This also includes your fans. So your fans are going to be the responsibility of the captain. And so if there are sportsmanship infractions that come because of fans that may be placed on the captain based on the fans' reactions and the captain's ability to help out with those. So the biggest piece of this is that one person can have such a huge effect on sportsmanship ratings and being able to make it into playoffs. So make sure you know who's on your team. Make sure that you're helping keep all of our players under control and level-headed, knowing that sportsmanship is the most vital piece of the success of our intramural sports program. It's a lot of information about alcohol and tobacco, but the basis of it is neither of them are allowed at all on site, and you definitely can't come to games after having consumed alcohol. But for tobacco, something that's kind of been a little bit confusing is maybe those e-cigs or vaping or anything like that. Don't put us in a position to where we have to try to figure it out, because e-cigs are also banned on campus. And so alcohol, tobacco, e-cigs, vaping, all of those, you're going to be asked to leave the facility. So more details on that are in the handbook, but the root of it is not allowed at all. Zero tolerance. With ejections, hopefully we don't have those situations, but if they do end up happening, all of the ejected players would be immediately suspended from further participation. Any kind of verbal threatening, striking, physical abuse of any intramural sports staff member is going to be immediate suspension, and that's going to be at least for a year. And with those, we automatically refer those to the Department of Student Conduct and Academic Integrity. We have other cases that we'll refer to them as well if they are of a high intensity. For ejections, they're always going to count as 2 sportsmanship infractions against the team, whether it was 1 act or whether it was 2 technical fouls that led to the ejection. It's always going to count as a total of 2 sportsmanship infractions against the team. Sanctions for any ejection does not begin until the participant has met with the intramural sports admin staff and sanctions have been laid out. So we don't do any self-set sanctions. We always meet, discuss, and lay them out. For playoff qualifications, all teams advance to playoffs so long as they have not forfeited more than once and they maintain that 3.0 average of a sportsmanship during the regular season. For playoffs, we do an online draw. It's usually open on the Saturday following the end of regular season, and that seed order is determined by record first, and then by sportsmanship average, and then that tie is broken by point differential if necessary. Any team that enters playoffs between 3.0 and 3.33 is placed on probation, and any team that receives below a 3 during a playoff game, they're going to be placed on probation as well. And what that means is that while you're on probation, if the team receives below a 3.0 during a game, that could lead to the team being removed from playoffs. A team that receives below a 1.0 in a playoff game is going to be subject to further disciplinary action beyond just removal from playoffs. For the program, we update IM leagues pretty regularly. That's going to be where most of our official communication is sent out. We're going to send you cancellations, any kind of changes to your game, which includes maybe time or facility if something comes up, or other opportunities through the program. We're going to reach out to you via IM leagues. So make sure that your profile is up to date, make sure you're receiving those notifications, and make sure the right email is listed. This is a brief overview of the league sports that we're offering this year. So we have our 7-on-7, ultimate frisbee, sand volleyball in phase 1. And then the last sport in all of those columns is our self-scheduled sports. So tennis, badminton, racquetball, disc golf. You can sign up for those and then schedule your games at any time during the week with the person that we pair you up with. We also have a lot of tournaments going on throughout the year. So you can check that out on IM Leagues, and you can also check it out on our Intramural Sports website. And that website is listed right there at the bottom. You can find most of any kind of information you need for the program, as well as FAQs at sportsrec.kennesaw.edu/intramural sports. But we've also got our phone number listed there, where our office is, our email address, where you can find us on social media. I definitely encourage following us on social media to see what things are coming out from our Department of Sports and Recreation. And so with most of these, we're going to get back to you within 1 business day, so long as we're able. So again, if you have any questions or any concerns, feel free to reach out to us using this contacting us slide. But this concludes the 2018-2019 Captain's Webinar. Thank you for watching.